Good afternoon. This is the ninth lecture of the second testing period, and I trust that we're going to get finished today and prepare for your next exam, and this will help you. The reality is that we've been talking about the Redeemer Democrats who came back and redeemed the state of Texas, took back control from the radical Republicans, and Texas under the Redeemer Democrats did pretty well. From 1875 to 1890, the wealth of Texas increased 2.5-fold. Yet, despite denying appropriations out of general revenues in 1883 and 85 for University of Texas, the legislature funded improvements for other state facilities. A second hospital for insane folks in Texas was built in Terrell in 1885, the first facility since the original one was built in Austin in 1856. A state orphans home was built in Corsicana in 1887. A deaf and blind school for black citizens of Texas built in Austin in 1887. And a new capitol in Austin was completed in 1888. How could Texas afford such an affluent and beautiful capital of today? Well, in exchange for the capital, the state exchanged 3.05 million acres in the Panhandle, and that became the XIT Ranch, one of the largest ranching holdings in the United States of America. Law enforcement prevailed during the period of the 1870 to 1890s when Indian problems were restricted essentially to the western part of the state. However, in the southern part of the state, border problems existed, particularly with one bandit raiding out of Mexico by the name of Juan Cortina. He was active since 1859. He had been a Unionist guerrilla working against the Confederacy during the Civil War. Cortina was a folk hero to many Mexican people, but he was in fact a ruthless bandit and a killer to Texas authorities. He continued to plague South Texas for many years and would be a viable player in South Texas for many, many years to come. Throughout the state, in the 1870s and the 1880s, cattle rustling, horse theft, and stage robbery was very common. Stock associations were organized to cut down on the amount of theft of cattle and particularly theft of sheep. And influential Texans, but sadly, many of the influential Texans were those who were doing the actual stealing of cattle. An epidemic of stage robberies occurred from 1876 to 1883. For instance, in July of 1876, the Austin to San Antonio stage, which traveled that route 2 times a week, was robbed by Jesse James' gang, identified by the passengers because the Jameses were so notorious at that time that they no longer wore masks that covered their faces during robberies. And Jesse and Frank James were ID'd by members of the stagecoach, as were Cole Younger and his brother, the Younger brothers. Feuds and vigilantism were also common in Texas during this time period. So we needed strong law enforcement, and the Texas Rangers remained the most effective against outlaws such as John Wesley Hardin. And in fact, in the period of 1876, I did a study of the city of Austin in the first centennial of our national history, 1876. And constantly, the citizens of Austin were complaining about the outlaws in Oatmanville. I didn't know where Oatmanville was, and after a lengthy study, I came to understand that Oatmanville is Oak Hill on the south side of the Colorado River, and Austin, of course, is on the north side. And outlaws lived in Oak Hill and would go into Austin and shoot the place up, and then rob and retreat to Oatmanville. And the citizens of Austin were constantly asking for a Texas Ranger to go out to Oatmanville and to deal with these outlaws. Rangers also broke up feuds throughout the state and restored order. When lawlessness reigned, the Rangers brought order, such as in Kimball County, next door to us, where Rangers eventually arrested 41 men. By 1879, Rangers had severely limited panhandle cattle rustling. Yet not all Texans welcomed the Rangers. In South Texas, where some Rangers were even Mexican American, the South Texas citizenry of basically Hispanics alleged abuse and mistreatment of Hispanics. Improved court procedures augmented Texas Ranger efforts, but slowly but surely, peace came to the state of Texas. The period after the Civil War was a period of great railroad expansion. Most Texans saw the railroad as a key to the state's growth and prosperity. Railroads were cheap, they were fast and dependable means of marketing, and that required a railroad. But freight rates after 1879, freight rates were never more than about 50 cents per 100 pounds per 100 miles, and freight rates tended to decline from that figure over time. Texans courted the railroads because not getting a railroad would simply kill a community. Therefore, Brenham, Texas, granted right-of-ways and even a $150,000 cash bonus to attract a railroad, as did Fort Worth, also granted bonuses to railroads. $2 million state dollars subsidized county and local efforts through state bonds. Later, public lands were utilized. The legislature would grant up to 16 sections of land for each railroad mile constructed in the state of Texas. Eventually, some 41 railroads received, quote, free Texas public lands. The largest, J. Gould's Texas and Pacific Railroad, received a total of 5,167,000 Texas acres. A total of 32,150,000 acres were granted to 41 railroads doing business in the state of Texas. In retrospect, many question the wisdom of these massive land grants to railroad corporations. In 2 decades, the bulk of the state's railroads were built. In 1860, 11 short railroad lines total less than 500 miles in all of Texas. But by 1890, the state of Texas had 8,710 miles of railroads. The Houston and Texas Central Railroad ran from Houston to Hearne to Dallas, and the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas Railroad was built south through the Indian Territory, while the Galveston to Richmond to Fort Worth construction occurred. The Galveston-Richmond to San Antonio track was tied to the Southern Pacific Railroad that ran from El Paso to Del Rio to San Antonio to give Texas part of a Southern Transcontinental Railroad by 1883. A route from Marshall through Fort Worth to Abilene to Pecos into Sierra Blanca tied the northern and eastern sections of the state to the Southern Pacific Railroad by 1882. So transportation developed greatly in Texas by 1882. The rapidity of transportation helped transform the state's economy. In agriculture, the change was from subsistence farming to commercial farming, particularly that of cotton. By 1880, Texas farmers raised a cotton crop on 2.5 million acres, and that crop was valued in 1880 at $57 million. Despite boll weevils, Johnson grass, bad weather, etc. Advocates of diversification simply went unheard. But even fluctuating markets and with the crop lean system, many Texas farmers didn't see prosperity. Thus, the agricultural protest movement that would haunt Texas in the 1880s and the 1890s. Other Texans turned to industry, although industry was confined to small shops and industrial workers, and industry by 1880 involved only 1% of the entire state population in Texas. The processing of agricultural goods would become a major late 19th century business. Flour milling led the way, and ranking before lumbering. Cottonseed products increased in importance, and by the 1880s, meat packing became important. The meatpacking industry was born in Victoria, Texas, as early as 1868, but in 1884, a Fort Worth packing plant opened, and in 1890, the Fort Worth stockyards opened their doors. Textile manufacturing began in Texas before the Civil War at New Braunfels, and with the cloth factory at the state penitentiary during and after the American Civil War. Later, cloth plants were set up in several East Texas towns, but they didn't seem to prosper. Lumbering in East Texas and mining operations helped the state's economy. And in 1866, Lyle T. Barrett, B-A-R-R-E-T, completed the first Texas oil well at Oil Springs, east of Nacogdoches. But the Texas oil industry wouldn't prosper until the discovery of Spindletop Field in 1900. Some workers looked to organization to advance their interest. The Screwmen's Benevolent Association in Galveston evolved into labor unions, and by the 1870s, railroad brotherhoods were organized in the state of Texas. By mid-1870s, public attitudes toward unions were essentially neutral, but strikes during the decade slowly turned the public against labor by 1880. In the 1880s, the Knights of Labor could claim 300 locals and 30,000 Texas members, and that constituted more than 50% of the non-farm labor in the state. The Knights of Labor in Texas struck on several occasions. For instance, in 1886, in what was called the Great Railroad Strike, the Great Southwestern Railroad Strike, 9,000 workers struck against Jay Gould's Texas and Pacific Railroad. Violence in Fort Worth caused Governor Oxcart John to turn out the militia and the Rangers. When the strike was ruled in contempt of court, its backers were broken, ending the power of labor unions in Texas until well after 1900. But at this point, in the 1880s, we have to talk about the growth of a political organization called the People's Party of America, because out of frustration with the inability of the national government and the state government to deal with the agricultural problems of the nation, including farmers in Texas, farmers finally would give up their lobbyist activity and say, you know what, if we can't get the government to pass laws that are sympathetic to our lobby, then we, this lobby of American farmers, need to organize politically and put our own candidates on the ballot, take over the government of the United States, take over the government of Texas, and then farmers will be able to pass legislation that will assist those who are so heavily in debt. But the Farm Alliance movement is something that we're going to save, and we'll start after our test. Our second midterm test will start with a Farmers Alliance movement of the 1880s and the People's Party of America, political organization of farmers by the early 1890s. But that's a story for another day. This is the 9th lecture and the concluding one in the second testing period of History 2303. I'll see you around campus. I'll see you in the clouds. Study and prepare well for the second test, midterm test, that will soon to be coming. Have a good day, and I'll see you later.